Hi there, Katerina. How are you today?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Great. It's great to have this opportunity to have a discussion about the recent research that you were involved with, and it was supported by NUIG and the Western Development Commission. And what was the title exactly of the research project, Katerina?
So we did one survey about remote work in May, and then the second one in October.
In October. So we've got a second round of results and interesting insights coming out from that at the moment. So what I wanted to have a chance was to go through a few points with you today. And one of them was the context of this research, because it's come out because it surveyed 5,639 respondents in terms of their experience of remote working. And as we both are involved in further education in Ireland, we were interested to discuss maybe the difference between the context in relation to further education and workers or employees experiencing remote work. So we were just commenting before this on the maybe difference in the attitude of someone who is working in further education from home remotely at the moment, and someone who's maybe working for a company. And what do you think the difference would be?
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this with not all the 5,000 people were lecturers, but a great proportion of those ones, of course, work in higher education. So if you are lecturing, you have two sets of relationships you need to maintain while being at home. So you have your colleagues with who you interact, but with who you normally don't work with. So you don't often create courses together. And then you have your students, and your students are the ones who are asking questions. You are responsible for them, and in some way you need to make sure that they're passing the exam. So in this way, this is slightly different than if you're working for a company.
Exactly. And the thing that's interesting as well is the infrastructure that many of the further education institutes had to try and adopt in terms of their response to the pandemic and everyone suddenly being in this remote working situation. And I guess when we look at those two relationships that you called out that various lecturers would have, and we've also, of course, got all the support staff that are based at a lot of these institutions and universities, but it's true, they've got the relationships within the staff they work with, their colleagues, and also with the end student. But I was thinking it's also interesting that they may have different boundaries and expectations for their work than others. And that could be down to them being vocational in their nature, in terms of not so much seeing their job as a 9 to 5. What would you think about that?
Yes, I do think that, of course, for some, if you work in higher education, some people like the research more than the teaching. But now focusing only on the ones who enjoy the teaching, and as you said, it's their vocation. With remote, with everything going virtual, students can study at whatever time they want. And of course, they always did that, but now even more. So when going through the open-ended questions of the first survey, I read teachers saying, I get questions, at every time of the day, or assignments are submitted once in the morning and once in the afternoon. So teachers felt that they are teaching 24/7. And if you don't set your own boundaries because you want to help the students, you don't want to let them hang with their questions, then this remote environment created extra stress.
That's so true. And if you are logging on and reacting, because obviously a student with a question who would go into an in-person lecture, Katerina, would wait to ask the question often when they were in person. They could be studying at home the night before and then the next day go in and ask that question directly to their lecturer. That's gone now, and the questions are happening at all these hours. So people really need to have those boundaries in relation to their digital health and when they are available to work, because otherwise it would be so difficult to switch off and have some downtime. But so I think that's one really important factor, but also that students maybe their expectations are quite high if they're expecting also that 24/7, because it's almost like then a member of staff being on call the whole time if they're contactable the whole time. So there's a point there in terms of boundaries to consider from maybe the organizational or the institutional side as well. The survey, one of the points that really jumped out at me, or the results that jumped out at me from the survey, the recent one, is that only 8% of the 5,639 respondents said that they would like to go back on site after, in the future, whenever this ends. And I wonder if we can focus on that for a minute, and perhaps the impact on staff going forward and students of further education.
Yeah, I think this shows that we clearly need to think about an educational model that can combine offline and online education. It's not either or. There are certain things that are easier done offline, and there are certain things that are easier done online, and we need to realize what learning activity is best suited for what format. For example, if you think about lecture type of teaching, where students come into a lecture hall, sit down for 3 hours and just listen to you, that is a learning activity that certainly should never ever happen again offline. There is no reasons why a teacher cannot pre-record the lectures and students watch them, and then we use the offline time where we are in the classroom to actually have discussions, which of course could happen also via Zoom, but then students need to have the right skills and confidence to be with the camera on and engaging in the visual interactions. So there are universities, admin, support staff, teachers, everybody needs to review how they are designing the courses and what activities needs to happen offline, instead of saying, for example, all courses need to have 30% offline activities without consideration of the course material. So there needs to be a move towards mixed model. And I've been teaching online since 2010. So teaching online isn't new, and not adopting this or not going towards this will make it difficult for universities to survive. For those ones who are not changing, they will have difficulties.
I totally agree. And then the speed of pace in these recent months as well has just meant that if you haven't caught up, if you haven't considered, but I really agree with that, both matching the task or what the learning outcome to how you deliver it, whether it be online or offline, but also the whole bite size, the whole maybe changing how you deliver those bits of content in more bite-sized pieces, which is something that's been happening in the corporate space for quite a while. We've got so many options with audio recordings, with short, snappy pieces of articles, etc., that students can maybe learn better from in smaller, more bite-sized chunks. But also, you touched on digital literacy there, in terms of students actually knowing how to engage, for example, in a tutorial workshop that might be online, with camera on, with a certain more prescribed or more detailed explanation of what the expectations are. Because when you're in a physical workshop, you can show and explain through, say, an interesting discussion where 2 or 3 students get involved, and the other students will notice that perhaps extra learning has happened because something has been discussed. And that sometimes gets lost in the digital world when people don't fully understand how, for example, Zoom breakout rooms might work, or certain engagement on certain video conferencing. So what do you think about that digital literacy piece for a minute, in terms of?
I think it is important. I think there are different student groups that need to be catered for. So you have what we would call digital natives, for which it would be normal to do things online. But I also had some older students who were struggling with using the laptop. And those need extra help. And for those ones, the offline education at the beginning to kickstart them, well, kickstart is maybe the wrong word, but just to give them the skills in order to be able to learn online is necessary. We also need to consider language skills, like can you actually follow online classes, or would be the text format better? So, but focusing now on digital literacy, there are different skills that some of them will have from high school, or some of them will have from school and from home, I meant to say, and others will not. And university needs to provide the skills, or needs to help the students who need more help in order to have these skills.
Exactly. And then on the other side, we of course have to make sure that the staff have the skills they need, because we can't take for granted that they have those skills.